To note that Part 1 of the third schedule is being amended to exempt from GCT payment armored vehicles with a cost, insurance, and freight CIF value in excess of $33,000 to be utilized in providing armored cash courier services. Secondly, the amendment will also exempt the added cost of armoring a vehicle to render it fit for use as an armored vehicle imported for the specific use of providing armored cash courier services. Madam Speaker, the measure is intended to be temporary, and as such, the effective period for the relief is between April 1, 2024 to March 31, 2026. It is therefore being encouraged that entities engaged in the cash courier service utilize this period of GCT and SCT relief to upgrade their fleet and invest in purpose-built vehicles. Madam Speaker, I will now move to the second measure addressed by this order, which is the standardizing of Jamaica's general consumption tax GCT treatment on raw foodstuff. Madam Speaker, by virtue of Jamaica's membership to the World Trade Organization, WTO, the country is not allowed to implement internal tax measures designed to protect domestically produced products. The utilization of GCT, which is an internal tax currently charged on imported raw foodstuff, but not on locally produced raw foodstuff, could be interpreted as a measure that gives protection to domestically produced raw foodstuff. Madam Speaker, this is considered an uncompetitive practice from the perspective of international trade and Jamaica risks, at the very least, jeopardizing the relationships with its trading partners. In light of this, Madam Speaker, we are amending the third schedule of the GCT Act to equalize the tax treatment for both domestically produced and imported raw foodstuff. Therefore, both domestically produced and imported raw foodstuff will now be exempt from the payment of GCT. Madam Speaker, this amendment applies generally to the following items: fresh fruit and vegetables, ground provisions, legumes, onions and garlic, meat, chicken, fish, crustacean or mollusks, and corn. Madam Speaker, it should be noted that items previously not considered raw food and subject to GCT will continue to remain subject to the tax. Madam Speaker, although we are removing the GCT on imported raw foodstuff, this Honourable House should note that the items in question still attract taxes, primarily common external tariff, CET, and additional stamp duty. The removal of the GCT on imported raw foodstuff preserves our international trading relationships by removing the risk that Jamaica will face trade sanctions from other member states as a result of the discriminatory treatment applied to imported raw foodstuff. In concluding, Madam Speaker, the measures included in this order aim to facilitate investment in the armored cash courier industry and to remove any unnecessary risk to our international trade profile due to distortionary GCT practices. The House is therefore being asked to approve the General Consumption Tax Amendment of Schedules Order 2025 resolution.
Aaron will respond.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. On the first measure, the opposition has no objection to it. We recognize the importance of cash in our society, and we're fully aware of the number of incidents where cash courier companies have been attacked, people have been killed, and the impact that that has had on the ability of banks to restock their ATM machines and ensure that there is adequate cash. So any measure which facilitates those companies having more armored trucks is certainly something that we would support, and we do. Madam Speaker, on the second measure, we do have concerns about the removal of GCT on imported raw food items. My first question to the Minister, can you indicate which countries, if any, raised an objection to this? And did these objections take place within the ambit of the World Trade Organization, which has a process to deal with objections of this nature? And if you could indicate where within the process that objection got to and whether there was a resolution. I raise this because the removal of GCT on imported items has the potential to negatively impact the local agricultural sector. Notwithstanding what anybody wants to say, we know that developed countries subsidize their agricultural industry to an extent that we don't, very heavily. And while I assume there was some pressure brought on the government to undertake this measure, we operate, trade operates within a rules-based environment. So I want to know who raised the objection, where within the WTO process we got to, what was Jamaica's defense, whether the advice taken to remove the GCT was something done in consultation with the AG's department and other stakeholders, because we don't have a level playing field in this world, and we don't want to undertake measures which will negatively impact our local industry. I know this was introduced by your predecessor. We raised the concerns then. There really wasn't any satisfactory answer provided as to why we were being forced to take this measure. But now that we are here, I would like some answers on that particular issue.
Of ATMs and of armored vehicles arriving to either deliver or remove cash. So I don't think anybody in the House would have an issue with that. I also want to endorse a concern raised by my colleague, the member for Western St. Andrew, in relation to the timing of the implementation of this amendment to the GCT Act, third schedule. As has been said, we are now in an era where measures including tariffs, but also not limited to tariffs, all sorts of measures affecting trade are being touted, being pushed, being considered, and it's a very unsettled environment because we don't know where it's all going to end. In the meantime, we are removing a protective measure that was in place for the benefit of local producers of food and exposing them to the loss of that protection. Yes, there may be other import duties and charges that the importers of these items will have to pay. But as has been said, it is well established that for some of our trading partners, there are heavy subsidies that their producers enjoy from the states in which those countries, those producers are producing those food items. So it's not a level playing field in terms of the cost structures that the various competing players have to contend with. And the removal of this at this time seems to me to be premature. And although it was announced in the budget debate a year ago, and it's only coming here now, it seems to me that much has changed since then in terms of the international environment concerning trade. And I think we would be well advised to wait to see how the dust settles before we rush to implement this permanently in our law. And I also endorsed and would like to, and I would also like to endorse and look forward to hearing the answers to the questions as to how this particular measure originated. You know, who was bringing pressure against Jamaica on this issue? Which country or countries? Where did it reach in the WTO system? What was Jamaica's stance in relation to any proceedings, if any, that were brought in the WTO system? How were those proceedings or that complaint or complaints, how were they resolved? You know, all we heard was these protective measures were being removed, but we've never had a satisfactory answer as to why this has happened. And I look forward to the answer to that. There's one other point I wish to make, Madam Speaker, and it is this. These measures are having retroactive effect. So the armored vehicles, the dispensation or the exemption, the zero rating, whatever it is, under the second schedule, which I assume is the SCT, and under the third schedule, the exemption under the third schedule, is taking effect from, in one instance, April 1, 2024, and in the other instance, July 1, 2024. Similarly, the exemption in relation to the raw foods, whether it be meats or vegetables, is taking effect July 1, 2024. Now, I have to ask, what is the situation in relation to the imports which have taken place up to this date, or up to the effective date of this order? Was GCT collected or not on these items? If GCT was not collected on these items, what was the legal basis for it not being collected? Because I'm not aware of any provisional collection of tax act orders coming here for approval to implement on a temporary basis these measures. Normally, under the provisional collection of tax act, the minister can vary a tax or levy a tax, but it lasts for a finite period of time and then expires unless it comes here and is approved by the House. No such orders have come in relation to this, to the best of my knowledge. So my question is, what was the situation in relation to these imports during the period from these dates, which they're the effective dates of the order, April 1 in some instances, July 1 in others from last year, up to the time of the effective date of this order. And this order is dated March 19th. And I believe it takes effect on that date, subject to being approved here affirmatively. So I want to know, was GCT collected on these imports in the intervening period? If the answer is yes, what was the, or if the answer is no, it was not collected, then what was the legal grounds or basis upon which it was not collected by customs at the wharf? And if it was collected, with this measure now taking effect retroactively, what is going to happen to the revenue that was collected? Are we now exposed to having to refund these people for the GCT that was paid on these imports? There's a lot to be answered in relation to this, Madam Speaker, and I look forward to hearing the responses, or perhaps we should suspend the debate of this measure to give some time to the Minister to look into these very important issues. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker.
Minister Mike.
Madam Speaker, I ask the House to recall that the GCT measures were announced by the former Minister Clark as part of the revenue measures of 2024-25, and they were not made into law. It is my understanding as well, with regards to specific countries that object. I understand from our technical persons that all of this happened when Jamaica was doing the review of our trade policy, and this came up by the reviewer. Jamaica's trade policy was being reviewed by the WTO, and it was noted. It was not a specific country, but by way of the process of review. The UK and the EU asked that we correct all measures inconsistent with our WTO obligations, and this happened in 2024. It started. So it started, Madam Speaker, with the WTO reviewer in November of 2023, and UK and EU comments occurred in July, August of 2024. Madam Speaker, there are some other questions that the members asked. In order to get those responses, Madam Speaker, I'm going to ask that the debate be suspended until further notice. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Appreciated. Minister? No.
We're not going to bully the speaker. Yeah? Yeah? You want to bully everybody, but that not work. The debate closed. Suspend. Suspension. You ask for the suspension when you get it. Because if you just ask for it.
Members, no.
So you can't stop and speak for you.
Members.
Our funds drop out today?
Members, the question is that the debate be suspended at this time. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.